Hey guys, Chairman here. Let's say you're like me and you want to get into Kaguya, but for some reason, you don't have any double rares. Maybe you only bought a rare and under playset, or maybe the double rare prices were too high and you weren't ready to jump in. But let's say you still want to play the set, so you're looking for a deck that's cheap, but still good, that doesn't break your bank. Well, today here I have a deck that is built with no double rare or PR cards and clocks in just under 5,500 yen. And honestly, I think this is the best deck that you can build in the game without any double rare cards. It has a solid level 1 advantage engine, a respectable finisher, and it has many tools that help it stand up to the current metagame. It's simple and straightforward to play, but still has lots of room for skill expression and mastery. So I think it's a solid pickup for players of all skill levels, especially for the price. Let's get straight into it. So first off, I have here all the cards required for the level 3 Shirogane Climax combo. And there's a lot of cards, but let's go over them one by one. Shirogane is an on-play healer that has 2 Climax combos with the Standby Climax. The first one is when the Standby is played, if he is in your front row, you can choose one of your other characters to stand it. This allows you to standby a beater in and attack with it immediately, so that you don't have to wait a turn for the standby to get its value. The second effect is when this card attacks, if you have this Kaguya, this Ishigami, and this Chika on the board, you can burn 1 damage. Now this might not seem like a lot, but it is free, and it is quite easy to meet the condition. Most importantly, none of these Climax combos require you to be at level 3, which means you can standby a Shirogane out at level 2, and then use the Climax combo the following turn. And this is where this deck can do something that most other decks can't do, which is to build advantage and push damage at level 2. Ideally, you want to be using your Shirogane Climax combo at level 2 every game. Now let's talk about the other cards required for Shirogane's Climax combo. The 3-2 Kaguya has the first effect that gives 1500 power to your entire board when she's in your front row, which is great since you're normally standbying her out into the front row. Her second effect is when she attacks, you can pay 1 and discard a card to perform what is known as the Icy Tail Michiru effect, which is your opponent mills the bottom 3 cards of their deck, and for every climax that they mill, you burn 1 damage. So if they mill 2 climaxes, you burn 2 damage, and if they mill 3 climaxes, you burn 3 damage. This effect is really good, especially in the current meta where everybody's playing for compression, and this is what allows this deck to stand toe-to-toe against other decks that have better compression through memory or other means. The 2-2 Ishigami has an effect that is pretty common for cards in decks with standby. It gains 1000 power for every other card on your field, and it also has Hand Encore. Since we need it for the 3-2 Shirogane's effect, we always want to see 1 copy of it, but since it has Hand Encore, we can just use other cards in our hand to keep it around, so we don't need to see more than 1. It's yellow, but we never play it from hand, we always standby it out. Lastly, the 0-0 Chika is a Brainstormer, but it's a special Brainstormer that only hits on 2 specific climaxes, the Standby and the Blue Gate from the TD. If you brainstorm a hit on either of these climaxes, you can search for a Shuchiin character and then assign 1000 power, which helps you get over your opponent's board. Her other effect gives 500 power to this 3-2 Kaguya and the 1-0 Kaguya from the TD, which is your level 1 climax combo. Since each copy of the Brainstorm gives Kaguya 500 power, having 2 in the back row will bump Kaguya up to a respectable 6000 power. We run 4 copies of the Brainstorm so we can have that option. The level 1 Kaguya has a climax combo. At the start of your Encore step, if your hand is 6 or less and she's in the front row, you can look at the top 3 cards of your deck, choose 1 Shuchiin character, add it to your hand, and the rest goes to waiting room. This climax combo has a lot of restrictions that make it weaker than other climax combos, but it has 2 specific strengths that still make it a solid choice. The first strength is that the climax combo happens at the start of your Encore step, after your attacks. This is an improvement over other level 1 combos that check on attack, like Emilia or Yukina. You can make the decision of how many cards to check after you've seen your triggers. If you trigger 3 clean cards, then maybe you don't want to dig too far into your deck because there's a lot of climaxes left. Or maybe you trigger 3 climaxes and you just need to mill through your deck as fast as possible. Having your trigger knowledge first is a big benefit. The second strength is that this Kaguya's climax combo will activate even if she's reversed, because it happens at the start of your Encore step before she gets sent to the waiting room. This way you can still use the climax combo even if you were to lose board, which is an improvement over other climax combos that require your opponent to be reversed or the slot to be empty like Toka. Being only able to check 3 cards is still a big weakness, but I found that the strengths made it much more solid than I had originally anticipated. Moving on, we played 2 copies of the card from the booster set that bonds to the 1-0 Kaguya. This card's really important because it allows us to recur the level 1 climax combo much more frequently than other level 1 climax combos. We can use the climax combo to add copies of the level 0 bonder to our hand, and then when they get sent to the waiting room, the next turn we can use the bonders to grab them again and then climax combo again. which makes for a very solid advantage engine. The second effect of the level 0 bonder is a change to this 1-1 Hayasaka. The 1-1 Hayasaka has an effect that prevents it from being reversed by costless cards, which makes it a good matchup against most decks that are not standby. This can be especially useful if you've cancelled a lot at level 0 and need a way to deal with your opponent's level 1 board while being grade stuck. The 1-1 Hayasaka is also a solid standby target, which is why we run 3 copies in hopes that we can ditch it from our opening hand and standby it out at level 0. It gets an additional 2000 power if you have 2 or more other characters, which is a fairly easy condition to maintain. In the late game, extra copies of the 1-1 Hayasaka can be used as encore fodder for the 2-2 Ishigami. All these cards are a highly synergistic bundle that form the core of this deck. Up to now, it's been pretty auto-build. The rest of the cards will help supplement this core by building a strong foundation at level 0, while also providing tools at level 2 to assert dominance. First, we have our level 0 runner package. 4 copies of the level 0 Kaguya runner and 3 copies of the level 0 Ishigami runner. The Kaguya is both a free runner and a level 0 reverser, which means it excels both offensively and defensively. It's also an important red splash for our deck because we don't have many other sources of red. The Ishigami is a pay 1 run to back row effect that can also pump 2000 power when it attacks. The combination of these 2 cards is incredibly strong at level 0, both offensively and defensively. Moving on to utility cards, we run 3 copies of the level 0 Hayasaka Drop Search. The Drop Search has a second effect that allows you to bounce it to your hand when you play a climax to assign 2000 power. This is really good in standby decks to open up board slots. The combination of the level 0 Ishigami and the level 0 Hayasaka allows you to pump 4000 power, which makes this deck very strong offensively. Moving on, we have 2 copies of the level 0 Climax Swap Kaguya. Climax Swap cards are becoming more and more popular as Climax combos become more and more important for decks, and this deck is no exception. So the Climax Swap ability allows you to pay 1 stock and ditch a Climax to salvage any Climax, effectively allowing you to swap into the right Climax combo. This is really good for our deck because both of our Climax combos are particularly good in specific moments, meaning we always want to play the right Climax combo at the right time. This card also helps us meet red color requirement in this deck. The first effect of the card allows you to look at the top 2 cards of your deck and rearrange them, and that information is always good to have. We run 1 copy of this level 0 Kaguya that allows you to ditch a Climax to salvage any card from your waiting room. If you look at the deck, we don't have a lot of access to the waiting room. Our level 1 Climax combo is a check 3, and we run both Drop Search and Search Brainstorm. So this gives us needed access to the waiting room. It also helps us ditch extra Climaxes from our hand, which commonly happens in decks that run the Blue Gate trigger. Usually when I run decks with Blue Gate triggers, I always include utility cards that help me ditch extra Climaxes. And finally, we're running 1 copy of this level 0 Ishigami. Now this is a bit of a unique choice, but let me explain. If you look at the Kaguya set, the set has notoriously few costless handfix options. Most of the options that you have involve bonding to or searching for an event, but we don't run events in this deck. Having a costless handfix is really important in a deck with standby because if you're holding a card that you want to standby out, you need to find a way to get it into the waiting room. Now obviously you can use the Drop Search to discard it, but sometimes you don't want to spend the stock. So having an option to discard a card without spending stock is very important. So this Ishigami, when you play it, you look at the top card of your deck. If it's a Shuchin character or an event, you can add to your hand and discard anything from your hand. This is the way we can get cards into the waiting room for free. The second effect isn't very relevant, but it can be useful. When it gets reversed, you can choose 1 card from your opponent's clock, heal it off, and then your opponent puts the top card of their deck into their clock. Obviously, you can use this to snipe clock requirements from decks like Sunshine, but actually, since most decks are so compressed nowadays, you could use this to potentially burn a Climax off of the top of their deck, which could be really good in certain moments. At level 2, we have this 2-1 Kaguya. It has a resonance effect with the 0-0 Hayasaka Drop Search, which is one of the reasons why we run it at such a high number. At the start of your Climax step, you can reveal this card from your hand. If you do, this card gains 6000 power for this turn. Now, usually, 2-1 cards that gain 6000 power only do so when they're attacking a level 3 or higher unit, which is great for dealing with early plays, but not very good for dealing with standby. However, because this Kaguya is a resonance effect to gain the power, it's good against both standby and early plays, making a very strong all-around card to deal with your opponent's game plan at level 2. I mean, it's even good at level 3 as well. When this card reverses a level 2 or higher battling opponent, you can put the top card of your deck into stock. So it effectively pays for itself if it can get a reverse. We run 1 copy of this 2-1 Kaguya. The first effect is an experience effect that I honestly ignore. We don't really want to hit experience 5 in this deck because we want to have as many copies of the Shirogane and Kaguya in waiting room as possible. Normally, if I'm leveling, I'm usually leveling this for red and this for blue. So I kind of ignore the first effect. The second effect is where this card really shines. At the start of your Climax step, you can pay 1, ditch 1, and then you can choose one of your opponent's characters and move it to any empty space they have, and then this card gets 1000 power, which is not too relevant. Being able to move up your opponent's back row to their empty front row and killing it allows you to heavily slow down their game plan. You can use it to kill brainstormers or other very important back row cards that they have. Especially once you set up your standby board with the 3/2 Kaguyas, your board's going to be very big. So if your opponent is crashing into it, they're going to leave up empty spaces that you can use this to take advantage of. And the more you slow down your opponent at level 2, the more they have to rebuild their resources, which gives you more time to continue to use Shirogane's combo at level 2. So honestly, a solid card to have. You can also standby it out at level 1 and start using the effect then. The last two cards we have in this deck are 2 copies of the refresh counter. Refresh counter is really good in this deck because we don't really use a lot of stock. We can go into level 3 with 2 stock and get our entire combo off. We just need to play Shirogane for our hand, have the standby, and then we can just standby the Kaguya out. And we have enough stock to use all the effects. So we can use as much stock as we want at level 2 for good effects, and refresh counter is a great effect to have. If you trigger a lot of climaxes, you can use the refresh counter to shuffle them all back in. Also, when you're running out of deck, there's only like a few cards left in the deck, you can use the refresh counter to effectively bypass the refresh point, so it's like healing 1 damage. It's also a really good card to have to protect our board at level 2 when we standby out the Shirogane and the Kaguya. So we run 2 copies of it so we can see it as much as possible. So now I want to quickly go over some small upgrades you can make to this deck if you have access to a few double rares. Now, I'm not going to say, oh, just put in 4 Chica Rikis, just put in 4 K runners, to make the deck better. First of all, that's not a small upgrade, right? That's a lot of money. The point of this deck is to be budget friendly. And second of all, I would argue that neither of those cards belong in this deck in the first place. The K runner is not better than the Kaguya runner because we need the red. And also, the clean cut effect is not as good when you have standbys. And the Chica Rikis are not as important because we have other ways of getting the level 1 climax combo, like the level 0 bond. It's also yellow, which means it's an unnecessary color, and it duplicates a lot of the effects that we already have here. So actually, I would not put either of those cards into this deck. So what I am advocating is if you have like 10 extra bucks, you pick up a few double rares to supplement some of the weaknesses that this current list has that doesn't run double rares. The first card that I would recommend you add is 1 copy of this 0/0 Kaguya double rare. So the second effect is a twin drive effect, which is very useful in standby decks because you want to trigger the standby trigger, especially at levels 1 and 2. The first effect is why this card is especially important as a 1-of copy. It's a stock swap effect. You pay 3 stock, and then you send all your opponent's stock to a waiting room, and then they refill their stock from the top of their deck. This basically destroys any kind of stock compression your opponent might have. So if they have too much memory compression, you just snipe their climaxes. If they have too much stock, you wash it with the 0/0 Kaguya. It just allows your endgame to be much more competitive in the face of compression. I would only recommend this card as a 1-of. You already have 3 copies of the drop search to help you get this. And again, this deck is very stock light. You'll definitely have enough stock to use the first effect. If you were to add this card as a 1-of copy, I would recommend replacing one of the Kaguya climax swaps with this card. Now, the second card I would want to add into this deck is level 2 early play healers. Because this deck wants to stay at level 2 for a long time, any kind of early play healing that you can get at level 2 is going to help you stay at level 2 longer. The problem, though, with the early play healer that is already in the set, the 3/2K, I tested this card extensively at like 3 and 4 copies. The problem with this card is that while it was really good, it was really difficult to play and fit into the deck. First of all, it's an off color being green. You only run 4 other copies of a green card, and you need at least 1 Chica Brainstormer on the field. So you're looking at only like 3 extra copies of green. Having green in your level or clock at level 2 is difficult, and it was very awkward. The second problem is that the early playing condition is fairly difficult in this deck. 2 or fewer climaxes is really hard when you don't have a lot of ways to mill during your main phase, which this deck does lack. So it makes playing this K very difficult. But every time I play the K, it did feel good. I think early play healing is very strong. So if you have access to double rares, I would recommend playing maybe 2 or 3 copies of the Hayasaka early play. The early play condition is way easier. It's 4 more other characters on board. And the early play heal, while it doesn't heal a stock, you don't have to discard any hand for it, which is really good for this deck. These cards aren't that expensive. They're like maybe 600 yen a piece. If I were to run the early play heals, I would replace the level 2s. If we're running early play heals, we probably don't have the resources to play any other cards at level 2 besides just the samurai combo and then the early plays. You could consider running a 3rd copy, but I think 2 is enough. And these are the only double rares that I personally would recommend as an upgrade to this deck. One last thing about this deck that I want to mention before we finish off. Obviously, this deck is already really cheap. So if you're looking to get into some really cool foil cards, this is a great deck to start with. It's actually crazy how many cards in this deck come foil. For example, the Shirogane comes foil, the Ishigami comes foil. It's the only Ishigami foil in this set. The Chika Brainstorm comes foil. The Kaguya Refresh Counter comes foil. The Standby Climax comes foil, and you can see the fireworks. The other Climax also comes foil. The level 1 Climax combo comes foil. The 0-0 Kaguya Runner comes foil. The Hayasaka Drop Search comes foil. And last but not least, the 3-2 Kaguya TD also comes signed. So as you can see, there are a lot of foil cards in this deck. In fact, if we just put our hands in front and snap, and wow, look, so many foils! Just pretend that these cards are not non-foil. I only got 2 DDs. The crazy thing about these foils is that most of them are really cheap because these are cards that not many people are trying to buy. Well, actually, I mean, this one's pretty expensive, and I guess this sign's still pretty expensive. But I mean, the Shirogane is cheap. The Ishigami is pretty cheap. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that if you want to have fun with this deck and bling it all out, by all means, you can do so, and it looks great. My point in making this video is, if you want to get into Kaguya, let's say you're trying to get Kaguya for English. You're excited about the set that's coming out, and you want to buy into it, but you're just scared of spending too much money. What I'm saying is, you don't need to get your Chikarikis, you don't need to get your K-Runners, you don't need these cards. You can build this deck, it's cheap, it's fun, but it's also quite good. You're going to have a lot of fun playing Weiss. I would highly recommend this deck for new players of Weiss, especially those getting in through Kaguya. It's a very cheap deck. Just go try it out for yourself and see just how good it is.